Okay, this session is Grazing the Way Towards Soil and Water Conservation. We have two speakers today. We have Cody Rakes. He's with Loretto Mother House Farm, and Amanda Gumbert, who is with the University of Kentucky.
Good afternoon, everybody. Hope I don't bore you too much right after your lunch and have you dozing off and everything, but if you do, I'll understand. I've been in the same boat before. So I don't have a fancy slideshow or anything I'm going to show you. First, I'm just going to talk a little bit about my grazing operation and where I'm from, what I'm doing, how I got started, how I've progressed, and all that kind of stuff. And then I've got some show and tell that I'll share with you towards the end of my part. And then I'm going to lead into a little bit to what Amanda's going to talk about, and then we'll have some question and answer. As was said, my name's Cody Rakes. I'm a farmer in central Kentucky in Marion County. If you've ever heard of Maker's Mark Distillery, I'm about 4 miles as a crow flies. Actually not even quite that far. So we're just right down the road from Maker's Mark Distillery in Loretto. I'm a professional farmer and a recreational farmer. So my professional role is managing the Loretto Mother House Farm, which is an 800-acre operation owned by the Sisters of Loretto. They're a congregation of women religious, Catholic women, or nuns, if you're not familiar with what women religious are. They're in Loretto. They've been on that property since 1824. So they've got quite a history on that piece of land, and have a lot of interest in seeing that land maintained well and cared for long into the future as well. And so I started there in 2015, and I'll talk more about that. But we also have I said I farm recreationally. My wife and we have 65 acres that we farm together as well. So if I'm not at the farm working, then I'm at the farm working, or I'm somewhere talking about working at the farm. So I don't really know anything other than farming, it seems like, but it definitely is fun. So grazing towards conservation, I guess my way of synopsis of that is, ultimately I want to keep my clean water clean, and I want to filter and slow down the dirty water, okay? That's when it comes to water quality, which is a big part of the conservation on the farm is water quality. And that has to do with erosion, it has to do with infiltration, it has to do with how the livestock are grazing and the forage response and how the forages are utilizing that moisture and so on and so forth. There's a lot more to conservation than just that, but that's kind of a simple synopsis. It's a good place to start. It's a good place to kind of work your head into, because if you can take care of the water, a lot of other stuff kind of falls into place too. So a little bit of the details about the grazing operation. At the Loretto Mother House Farm, we have more than just grazing. We also have about 200 to 250 acres in crops: corn, soybeans, wheat, cereal, rye. We do 100% cover crops. We graze some cover crops, so I'll talk more about that grazing side. But we've got more than just the grazing operation. We've also got the cropping operation. We also do a lot of farmer field days and high school kids and local 4-H, and we have a lot of people come on the farm. In a typical year, I'm in front of 2,000, 2,500 people, either on the farm or off the farm, some kind of educational activities. But what I'm here to talk to you all about specifically is the grazing side. So we've got about 60 cow-calf pairs that we're grazing. We've got about 25 to 30 yearling heifers that we're also grazing along with those cows and those calves for replacements and for freezer beef. We take some of our replacements that we're not going to, they don't breed or we don't like them or whatever, and we take those and use them for freezer beef. In a pasture-based system, the freezer beef is a grass-fed, grass-finished system. We use a little bit of grain, stuff that we've got on hand from the corn operation. It's never a big part of the diet, just a little something to keep them attracted to a bucket. Makes them a lot easier to move around when they know what a bucket is. But when you really get into the rotational grazing thing, you don't even need a bucket. All you got to do is just drive your side-by-side out there, or you pack a reel or whatever that they get used to those daily moves, and they'll mob you trying to get to the next spot, even if you just gave them a new spot. They just get to that habitual habit of going to the next field. all pasture based. We don't do any kind of a confinement feeding or anything like that. Our predominant forage is cool season perennials, so fescue. Probably 90% of our forage is endophyte toxic fescue. We've got red clover, white clover. I've tried to introduce some lespedeza and some bird's foot trefoil and some grazing alfalfa, and trying to get some diversity in there. Orchard grass, Johnson grass. Obviously not a cool season, but it's a big part of the grazing operation as well. We also have we use some winter annual cover crops and some warm season annuals for our grazing, and hay as well. We do feed hay. We're not grazing 365 days. The past 3 weeks have been very challenging in trying to graze. Cows, I've heard lots of people say, Greg Judy and others, they'll say, oh, my cows, they'll dig through the snow and go for the grass. And I guess I'm not strict enough, because I want to see those cows perform more than I want to see them graze, right? So grazing is not what I'm selling. I'm selling pounds, and so I want to have those animals continue to graze, and so I'll give them hay. Past 3 weeks they've pretty much just been eating hay. We have been supplementing with just a little bit of grain because our hay is not the greatest quality, but I'm looking forward to next week. We're going to get the cows back out on the grass, whatever it's like underneath all this snow. I don't know. I'm sure the quality has went down, but they're going to be happy to go as well, because I know they keep trying to go out the gate on me when I bring the hay in, so they're ready to go to the next pasture. The annual cover crops, again, I've got the grain operation. So we do graze our cover crops. Does anybody in here grow grain and have grazing animals? Okay, so I've got a few that may be interested in this. Everybody will tell you that if you graze your crop ground, you're going to compact it. Well, my argument is use some management. You don't just put those animals out there and leave them there. You don't put them out there when it's muddy. You don't put them out there when there's not enough forage available. If you have ample forage, and if you're watching this on the video, you probably can't see me, so I'm sorry. I'll try to remember to describe what I'm showing you. But if you've got, 6, 8, 10, 12 inches of forage out there in that field, that acts as a mulch when those animals are walking across it. When you get it grazed down to 2 to 3 inches, you got to get them off. If you leave them there, they're going to compact that soil. And I actually, when I came into grazing those cover crops, I thought, well, I can stand to have a little bit of a yield decline in my subsequent grain crop, because I've got that forage value that offsets that loss. But I'm actually not seeing that loss in the grain crop yield. I'm seeing consistent yields from fields that were grazed and fields that were not grazed. And what I'm seeing is tremendous increases in organic matter in my fields where I'm grazing and have cover crops versus fields where I have cover crops but I'm not grazing. So, what is the meme that you've seen on Facebook, the cow, they're a 4-legged composting machine that harvests their own compost material or whatever, and they self-replicate? Well, that's what cows do, right? And so those composting machines are out there converting that organic matter in that cover crop material into organic matter that's actually in the soil. So you do lose some of the weed suppression standpoint by reducing the biomass, and that's something that I'm trying to work through. But again, I've got that offsetting value of being able to get those animals. Kind of the way that I utilize the cover crops is, those 2 to 3 weeks at the beginning of the growing season when the fescue starts to green up, pull everybody on the farm onto cover crops, put them on there for those 2 to 3 weeks or so, considering that the weather is fit. If we're just absolutely torrential wet, they're not going to go on those cover crops. But if we've got soil conditions that are dry enough, I've got ample forage out there to kind of cushion and create a buffer between those hooves and that soil, then I'm going to put everybody on those cover crops. And what's that doing for my fescue? It's giving it some time to rest and recover and grow, right? It's giving it time to accumulate some growth. I'm not out there grazing that really green, washy grass where, you don't want to stand within 10 feet of the rear end of them. But the cover crops have already turned on. They've already built they've already accumulated some growth. They've got some dry matter to them. And so they're able to get a better diet on those cover crops than they are on that green, washy grass. and it gives that fescue an opportunity to accumulate some growth. So I see a lot of benefits from that. And what it actually does is that I wind up chasing grass all summer long. I just cannot get ahead of it. Until we get into the drought of the late summer, and then we start running out of grass. But that's when I'm actually implementing some other things now. But what we've been doing the past couple of years is we're using some warm season annuals as well. So I mentioned we grow wheat. This year we're growing cereal rye. Well, following that, we're going to plant some kind of warm season annual, usually because for us, double crop soybeans just doesn't pencil out in most years. So instead of planting those double crop soybeans, we'll plant sorghum sudan grass or something like that. And I'm running economics on this, trying to decide which is the best in the given year. And that implies flexibility, right? And I think that's another key component is remaining flexible. But utilizing those summer annuals, if they're in a place where I'm able to graze them, then I'm able to use those for grazing. We've got a few fields that we have that are basically dedicated rotation between summer and winter annuals, right there around the barn where it's kind of high value ground to be able to have your animals grazing for the finishing program and that kind of thing. I've kind of got those dedicated for cool and warm season annuals in a rotation. It has its own challenges, but it provides a lot of benefits in having those forages. You know, you've seen that summer slump and the winter slump and all this with the fescue and everything. Being able to try to flatline that at a higher level, you've got forages available all throughout the year. Has kind of been my goals. So how did I get started into all this to get, obviously this wasn't all just a flip of a switch. My very first experience with this, what I would call a more intensive grazing management, was in 2017 with stockpiling fescue. And the reason that I got into stockpiling fescue was I had went to a Kentucky Forage and Grasslands Council. They host a grazing school. So I went to that grazing school, and Dr. Ray Smith was just preaching the benefits of stockpiling and how it could help to extend your grazing season and yada, yada, yada. More days, every day grazing is cheaper than a day of feeding hay and all this kind of stuff. And so I was like, well, I've got this field that, it's got a lot of weed problems. And so, maybe it's a place where I can try to go in there and actually do something. And so I took about 13 acre field and we went through the protocol. We grazed it really tight there in late July. And that wasn't hard to do. I was inexperienced, and I grazed it tight. And then we put down some fertilizer. I think I put down like 45 units of nitrogen to the acre on the lower end of the spectrum. I'm kind of risk averse. I didn't want to put a big chunk of money out there into that field. We had phenomenal growth. I mean, I had fescue, if you stood it up, there was fescue in there that was over waist high, which I'm not a tall guy, but, it's still, 30, 34 inches of tall fescue if you stood those blades up. And I was just like, what am I going to do with all this? If I turn these cows out there, they're just going to make a mess out of it. And so I started researching and trying to figure out how to handle all that, and came across the idea of strip grazing. So basically the principle is you give them an allocation that's, maybe 1 day or 2 days or 3 days worth of forage, and you do all this math and use the grazing stick and all that. And I tried it and realized that grazing is not a science, and that's what a grazing stick is trying to do, is make it into a science. Grazing is an art, and you don't use measurements when you're doing art. You use visual observation, right? And so I threw the grazing stick away, and I just started going after it. And I gave them a day's worth of forage, and it wound up being 3 hours worth of forage. Then the next time I gave them a day's worth of forage, and it was a week's worth of forage. And through practice and trial and error, I finally kind of got it all figured out. But I was able to graze. I should have went back and looked at the numbers. But I was able to get utilization, like 90% utilization off of that fescue by doing that strip grazing, and eventually getting to where I was giving them daily allocations. Okay, and so I would not have to worry about a back fence because that fescue wasn't growing back. Right, all I had to do was have a fence in front of them and a fence in front of that. Because if you just have the single fence and you go in there and you try to set up the next fence, the cows are following you up and down while you're setting up that next fence. So you got to have two fences. And so then what you do is you go in there and you take up the first fence that's in front of them. They go into the section you just gave them, and they're occupied with grazing while you're setting up the next fence. If you think you're not going to have time, go ahead and set up, the next time, go ahead and set up, have two ahead of them. So you're kind of leapfrogging those fences down through the field. And that just sold me, seeing all of that forage get utilized. And then what was an additional benefit that I had no idea, I had never heard anybody talking about, was how much better that forage came back in the spring after having that really good rest and that nitrogen application and being utilized well, removing that thatch layer. That field has, this is 25, so, we're looking at 8 years later, and that field still looks better than it did before that stockpiling event. And I've stockpiled it a couple times since then. So stockpiling, in my opinion, is the cream of the crop. That's the lowest hanging fruit for improving your grazing management is to utilize stockpile. I have found that the nitrogen application is very beneficial, whether it's through commercial fertilizer or through manure or whatever. It is very beneficial, but you've got to have those fall rains in order for that plant to be able to utilize that nitrogen. So that's something that you kind of got to work through and figure out. It has been challenging for a couple of years to try and get good ample stockpile growth. 2017 was an exceptional year, but sorry, I'm checking my notes here to make sure I don't get too far off topic. Meanwhile, my wife and I, we purchased 65 acres of pasture and woodland, and on both farms I'm dealing with the same problems. Poor fence. Livestock access to surface water, right? That's a conservation issue. No buffer zones between the production area and the water. Heavy traffic area erosion, that's a fancy way of saying cow paths. Invasive plants, nutrient migration from the open parts of the pasture to the shade and water areas, declining forage production, increasing weed pressure, and low capital for improvements. Does anybody share any of those problems? Okay. And so I was trying to think about, what are some of the things that you all could maybe take away from this. For me, where I started was low dollar methods to making improvements, okay? So things that didn't cost a lot of money. Like I said, I'm risk averse. I didn't want to put a bunch of money into these practices. I didn't want to go build a barn, spend thousands of dollars and then not be able to get the return on that, right? So I wanted to find low cost, low dollar inputs to make those improvements. And so I found out about things like polywire and step-in posts and high tensile smooth wire fences. Those kinds of things are very, very effective for managing the movements and managing the grazing patterns of cattle. On our home farm, due to economics, we decided that we wanted to get into sheep and goats as opposed to cattle. Now, if you have sheep and goats, you're thinking, why would this guy get sheep and goats if he doesn't have fence good enough for cows? I've wondered that too. But we tried out the electric netting. And so, we could purchase 6 or 8 or 10 rolls of electric netting, and that would allow us to virtually fence our entire farm because we can move that netting where we needed it to go, as opposed to if we were going to try to put woven wire mesh fence up around the entire farm. You're looking at $40,000, $50,000, $60,000 or whatever, a huge amount of money. We just can't do that. We're trying to make a farm payment, raise a family, pay bills, all those kind of things, and we don't have the capital available to do that kind of fencing. And we think we don't have the time, but, if we could just sleep a few less hours, we can find the time. Angela's laughing because last year we spent a lot of midnights to 3 a.m.s working sheep on a cattle trailer in the middle of the night because it was the coolest time and it would stress them less. But you'll find the ways to make those things happen, right? I mean, you can find those opportunities. The next lowest hanging fruit was finding outside investments to help you make those improvements. If you have not worked with your local NRCS office for programs like EQIP and state cost share, those programs, you will have some skin in the game. In most of those programs, you will have some cost that is not covered through those programs. But you can do practices much, much cheaper than doing it out of your own pocket. Plus, you get some technical assistance with helping to implement those projects. So I would highly encourage you to look at those kinds of programs. Another one is CRP. CRP is traditionally looking at taking crop ground out of production and putting it into wildlife habitat, pollinator habitat. You can also enroll acres in CRP whenever they're serving as a buffer between your livestock area and water. All right, so let's say you right now have a pasture where cattle have access to the stream or the creek or whatever. If you'll agree to the contract terms, they'll pay you to put a fence in above that stream or creek or river or whatever, however wide it is, 60 foot, 100 foot, whatever, is deemed appropriate for that particular location. And then you can enroll those acres that you've lost in CRP. And we all know that those acres are probably not really productive acres anyway, right? I mean, they're dilapidated because they've got too much traffic, or they're brushy and scrubby because you can't access it very well. But you can get a rental payment to pay you for those acres. And it may not add up to a lot, but you got the fence for free, and you're getting paid for ground that you was marginally productive anyway. So that's another opportunity. The CAPE program, the County Agriculture Investment Program, that's another program that's available for producers in the state. It's probably one of the simplest programs that there is as far as being able to get the money. There's a lot less hurdles and everything to jump through. You just basically fill out an application, and if you meet the requirements, you get. Different counties handle a little bit differently, but in our county, you spend anywhere. They've changed the program now where there's some things are 25% reimbursement, some things are 50% reimbursement, and some things are 75% reimbursement. So what do Angela and I do? We just go ahead and cross off all the 25 and 50% programs. We only look at the 75% programs, because that means we spend $3,333 and we get $2,500 back. And so we were able to put a solar watering system in on our farm this year, and out-of-pocket cost. It cost us, $1,500, I think, for basically a little over $4,000 worth of expense. There's also a lot of mini grant programs out there. Different organizations, different universities offer mini grants, and that would be an exhaustive list to try and go through all those. K-State offers some mini grants. Different Ducks Unlimited, they offer mini grants for program. There's all kinds of mini grants out there. If you're willing to do the work, provide the data, jump through the hurdles that are required in order to do that, there is a lot of money out there to help with implementing conservation programs. And then also there's some climate smart programs. Oak is administering one of the climate smart programs. My wife and I, our farm, we've got enrolled in 2 separate climate smart programs, and then at the Lord and Mother House farm is also enrolled in 2 separate climate smart programs to help us to implement native grasses and silvopasture and nutrient management plans. And there's a whole number of different practices that we're working on to implement with those programs. And then kind of the final layer, the highest apple on the tree, is paying for the improvements with improvements in production. So the biggest thing that I've seen is the improvement in my stocking rate. I'm able to carry more cows on the farm, frankly, with less inputs than what the farm had historically been doing. Because of the grazing management, I'll talk more about some of the specifics of the rotational grazing and stuff. But because of the grazing management, because of the stockpiling, because of all those practices, I've been able to increase by about 20% what the farm had historically been able to stock. Seeding clover, that's one of those things that you see immediate payback on. There are some programs to help you pay for it, but I would suggest using those programs for other things, because seeding clover pays for itself. In increased production, increased performance by the animals. fertilizing the stockpiled fescue, you're directly offsetting your hay needs. If you're buying hay and you fertilize that stockpiled fescue, you get good growth of it. You're directly offsetting that cost, and you're improving your forage versus you're buying hay. I mean, obviously you buy hay, you're bringing nutrients in as well, but kind of evaluate those and decide which makes sense for you. And then one thing that I did at the Lord of Mother House is purchased an ATV for my temporary fencing system. So we have an ATV that is totally dedicated to rotational grazing. If any of you watch Greg Judy's videos, he's got a four-wheeler that's set up very similar to mine. I've got this kind of snorkel thing on the front of it, so I can drive across those poly wires. I've got a rack on the front, so in one pass I can set up a fence, and on the pass back I can take up a fence. So that saves a tremendous amount of time. Got paid employees, and so thinking about the value of their time, that four-wheeler will pay for itself over a period of a couple of years, just in reducing the amount of time that's spent walking back and forth or driving from post to post and stopping and getting off and all those different kind of things. So I'll transition now to some of the nitty-gritty, I call it, practices that are staples. First and foremost, I think electric fencing is a necessity, and I really think, I tried to kind of put a number to this, I think you need to plan on spending about $5 per acre grazed on a plug-in box. That may sound expensive, but that's about what I have invested in both of the farms that I'm managing. And that plug-in box will then be sufficient enough to handle a mixture of smooth high-tensile wire, poly wire, poly netting, and that'll get you all the way around the farm. It'll handle a little bit of grass load. So a really large energizer on the I have an 18 joule energizer and a 24 joule energizer. If I had to buy them over again, I would buy bigger ones. If one of them gets hit by lightning, which they've got protection on, if one of them gets hit by lightning, I'm going to replace it with something bigger, because there are still times that I find that we need a bigger box. And if it's a minimal cost to go from a box that does not have a remote to one that does have a remote, the remote is invaluable. Both of the fence boxes that I have a remote, so anywhere on that fence on the entire farm, I can touch that remote to that fence and turn that fence off. Another technique is if your Energizer is plugged in somewhere that has Wi-Fi, you can use one of those Wi-Fi smart plugs to, hey Alexa, turn off the fence box, and it'll turn the fence box off. You can be in a different country and do it if you wanted to for whatever reason. A minimum of 5 pastures or paddocks, that is your biggest bang for your buck. If you're going from a continuous grazing system where everything is grazing everywhere all the time, 5 pastures, splitting it up into 5 pieces, that's your biggest bang for your buck, because that gives you the opportunity to rotate once a week, and that gives 4 weeks of rest on every pasture. Okay, that's kind of your biggest bang for your buck. Now, once you get hooked on that and you start going to every day and twice a day and 7 times a day, I've never gotten that far, but but it's kind of that curve, right? So if you go from continuous grazing, your production and performance is really low, versus you go to that 5 paddock system, you're getting really high up on that curve. Every incremental thing you add beyond that, you're gaining less than you did with that going from that continuous grazing to that 5 paddock grazing system. This is something that is free. It does not cost you 1 penny, and that is to feed hay in the fall instead of in the winter. It does not cost you 1 penny to change when you feed your hay. Okay, what that allows you to do is to grow grass in the fall while you're feeding hay on dry ground in a t-shirt. Can you imagine doing that? It's pretty nice. That is something that we have done that has allowed us to grow stockpile. Generally speaking, on 60 to 80% of our farm, we're able to grow a substantial amount of stockpile on. We'll select part of the farm, and we'll put fertilizer on it. We'll do all the steps to get really good production on that. But we're able to grow some stockpile to be able to graze in the winter on at least 80% of our farm in most years, because we're pulling animals off, putting them kind of in not a confinement, but in a sacrifice area, somewhere we need to renovate or something like that. excuse me, feed some hay there, build some nutrients, while everything else is recovering, recouping, and growing. And then we have spring and fall calving. Generally speaking, we will feed hay from somewhere late August, early September, up through around 1st of December. We may let them out on some cover crops and stuff in that time, especially if we've got some summer annuals. We may graze some summer annuals in that time as well. But we try to get them off as much of the fescue as we can, so that we can grow grass during that time. And that allows us, generally speaking, to not feed any hay in December, January, and February, unless we have 3 weeks of weather like this, which you do need to have some hay on hand for in these kinds of events. Clover is extremely important. It helps to offset your nitrogen needs, as well as improves your performance. I have had over 5 pounds per day of gain on 600-pound feeder calves in the summertime because of having clover in those pastures. It increases your protein content in that sward. So I shoot to have 20% or better in dry matter percentage of that sward be clover. Red clover, white clover, ladina clover, trefoil, lespedeza, all those different kinds of legumes contribute to that. I'll show you some of my show and tell stuff here, but geared reels with poly braid. So there's two different kinds. There's multiple different kinds of poly wire. The poly braid is worth the additional cost that it costs. It will not snag nearly as bad. It doesn't get twisted up and raveled up like the poly wire does. The poly wire is twisted, whereas the poly braid is actually braided together, and so it doesn't snag as easily. And I've got some of this. I've got both up here that I can pass around and show you. And for my operation, what works really well is having 12 to 15 acre pastures. So a 60, I'd call it about a 70 animal unit operation. Works on about 12 to 15 acre pastures is what seems to work really, really well to get us to where we're doing about twice to 3 time a week rotations through the growing season. So that's kind of some of the nitty gritty. And then what Amanda's going to talk about is kind of the second part of it, which is learning from other farmers. I mentioned, what kind of got me started into this was one of those Forage and Grassland Council grazing schools. Going to the conferences, the field days, doing what you all are doing right now, attending Oak Field Days, and then this platform that Amanda's going to talk about it's called the One Good Idea, and their shop talks and their online learning community and this online encyclopedia of videos that I've got a few videos on there, and Amanda's probably going to tell you how many more I need to do. And actually hosting field days. Believe it or not, hosting a field day provides me a lot of insight because other people that are thinking about these kinds of things are looking at my operation. And not everybody's going to tell you what they think, but a lot of people will tell you what they think. And some of it's good, some of it's bad, but every field day I have hosted, I have changed something afterwards because somebody has suggested something, or just in the conversation it was made clear, hey, that's something we need to try. So again, I've got some show and tell that I'll kind of bring up at the end if Amanda wants to go ahead and have her little talk.
All right. Well, hello, everybody. Let me make sure that I am switching through these. Oh, I went the wrong way. That's us. Okay. So I'm Amanda Gumbert. I'm an extension specialist for water quality at UK. I've worked in extension for quite a while, a little over 20 years. And I will say that partnering with Cody and a couple of other farmers has probably done more for promoting conservation than I did for like the first 18 years that I worked, because of the peer-to-peer learning opportunities that it has brought about. And so that's what I'm going to tell you about. I know some of this you're going to be like, just stop talking because we just want to see Cody's toys and tools and how he does stuff, because that's all people want. And I'm good with that. But from the academic side of things, I have to tell you a few things about it. So I brag on Cody all the time, and Angela too, because really I know that she's really behind the machine, right? She's the engine. So, but I use this slide a lot, and I work a lot beyond Kentucky, also in the Mississippi River Basin. And I do talk about Cody a lot. A lot of our partners at other land grant universities kind of focus on more row crop production. And I wave my hand and say, whoa, whoa, whoa. In Kentucky, we have row crop production and a lot more. And so I appreciate the diversity that we have, and Cody and Angela represent that well. So I want to talk to you a little bit about these virtual farmer networks. Many of you may be plugged into those already. We certainly have a lot more opportunities than we used to. I think farmers are maybe overtapped sometimes for these peer networks, but the academics among us, we really appreciate it. But we're looking at peer networks as really a much more effective way for us to learn than the traditional, hey, let some expert come out and tell you what they know. Because, we've tried that for years and years, and we really feel like the effectiveness is better when you have somebody who's already done it, who can tell you this worked, this didn't. Cody's field days that he hosts, he's really in the nitty gritty, and I know you want to see what's in his wagon up here, of which reel works better and why, which box is better and why. And so he's going to get to the details of the production, and in the background I'm going, yeah, because we're getting conservation out of this. And you're getting all the benefits to your pastures and soils, and you're not compacting, and he mentioned keeping animals off when, in the not the best season, and so you're not getting a lot of that wear and tear on your pasture and such. So I throw all this up here, and really the third bullet I think is the most important. From a research perspective, farmer networks, and this is Linda Prokopi's work. She's at Purdue University. She does a lot of social science research around farmer networks and conservation adoption, and a lot of her research has shown that these farmer networks are the most consistent determinant of conservation practice adoption, because it's a peer-to-peer exchange of information. This practice worked for me. Here's how I paid for it. Go see your local conservation district office, go see your local NRCS office, and try this program. And this is how I made it work. Cody just said to you how they installed a solar waterer, or how they're adding to their infrastructure by utilizing these programs that are out there. And so we've started doing a lot more virtual, of course, in the last 5 years. And so I would say as a farm person, as an extension person, I'm like, we'll do the virtual stuff, but we really like to be together. Clearly, we like to be together and talk. But it's not always easy to leave the farm. It's not always easy to drive to a field day. You've got conflicts. You've got things that come up. And so now we're seeing that some research says there's really no difference between the virtual learning space and the in-person learning space. Yeah, I know. I see that look. Yeah, well, I don't know about that. We all have our personal preferences, but we can learn from each other in virtual spaces, because I think now we've exercised that muscle enough. We know, and we're comfortable with it. We may not like it. We may not turn our camera on, but we can listen. We can listen to a podcast while we're driving somewhere. We can watch a video in our pajamas when we can't sleep at night. Whatever, we can do all that stuff. So there is a space and a promise for a virtual engagement. And so that's what Cody mentioned. One good idea. I've got a couple of bookmarks, and some of them have a QR code, so if you just want to check that out later. But one good idea is multiple things. So one, it started as a virtual clearinghouse and a platform for us to have these short instructional videos. And I say short, some of them are longer, but I also know that nobody wants more than a 3-minute video. Our attention spans don't tolerate that. Back in the day, we made like 30-minute extension videos. Can you imagine? Nobody watched those. Nobody ever again. But so this platform also has podcasts, and it is for farmers by farmers predominantly. If we can get you to shoot a video of something. A lot of farmers don't want to do that, and that's what Cody's talking about. He has, I think, shot some video. He partnered with me on a project, couple of different projects. One was with the field day, and then the other on their home farm, and they put in a conservation practice. And because we're looking at that research side of things, we've got those mini grants, and we want to partner with farmers. And so I can easily, if you're interested and you have a project and you're willing to turn the camera around and go, here's this practice, I put it in, we've got a mess, and you can quickly edit a video together. I can incentivize you as a farmer to do that, because I want to create resources that facilitate peer-to-peer learning. So goodideafarm.org is that website. That's the platform. Producers throughout the Mississippi River Basin. We're a little short on Kentucky producers. So if you've got a great idea that you want to share with somebody and you are willing to, video yourself or have a friend or somebody do that, throw a short video together, send it my way, and we'll talk about it. And here's the manure management category. We are kind of Kentucky dominating on the manure management, because a lot of them, I said, are Iowa, Illinois, Indiana, and there. So I'm like, yeah, we've got cow manure over here. Let's talk about it. So we have, so Cody's got a video there. The other thing he mentioned is we have had several seasons of shop talks. They're virtual shop talks, and it's a 1 hour over lunch virtual gathering. It's for farmers. I run the registration, and if I see an email of somebody who's registered that is not a farmer, I'm going to email them and say, thanks for your interest. Either bring a farmer with you or maybe consider another opportunity somewhere else, because often with conservation-related things, we'll get as many conservation professionals as we will get farmers, and we want it to be a farmer-to-farmer exchange, not a farmer talking and a bunch of conservation professionals looking at them and listening. We want it to be that information exchange. So we try to do that. We have a farmer who is the pitcher, and what they do is they tell us who they are, a little bit about their operation, and they say, I am having trouble implementing this conservation practice, and I would like to get some ideas about it. We had one yesterday, and the farmer was interested in knowing how to engage young producers, farmers just starting out, who may be not have a lot of capital, but how to help them engage in conservation and handle the issues that they may have, but because they're short on capital. And so that was the whole conversation, and it evolved into on-farm efficiencies. So it really dug into the financial aspects of the farming operation, but with an undercurrent of conservation practice implementation. So, it's not, it's a different way, in a realistic way, to look at conservation implementation. Is how do we do it to make it financially sustainable as well? Not just conservation yes, protecting soil and water resources are critically important, certainly for me, but if it doesn't make financial sense for a farmer, how am I ever going to bridge that gap for that particular thing? So we've got 2 more coming up. Our next farmer, I believe, pitcher is going to be a Kentucky farmer who's going to kind of continue that conversation about efficiency and really hone in on making some of those efficiency decisions. And I know from a couple of conversations the last couple of weeks, folks are really concerned about that with grain prices where they are. Efficiency is going to be the name of the game moving forward. So we've got 2 more. I encourage you to sign up if that works for you. It's Thursdays over lunch. You can listen from the tractor. You can listen from the truck. You can, the optimal thing is to have your camera on, but if you're going down the road, I would prefer you to keep your camera off. So anyway, think about joining that. These are folks, what it looks like. Matt Lawrence is across the river in Indiana. This is the crazy stuff that happens. He listens while he's, working on the farm doing something. Last winter, we went with him while he picked up a load of Asian carp that he was going to ferment and grind up and ferment and use for fertilizer. And so at the very end of the conversation, he turns his camera on and kind of walks us through what he's doing. It was hysterical that he's listening to all this conversation, but at the end, he's like, well, let me add to it, and here's what I'm doing. And it's connecting people who might be a little wacky sometimes, a little wackadoodle, but we've all got these ideas that we're trying to figure out and troubleshoot, and sometimes you just need 4 or 5 other people in the room to throw an idea out and talk about it, and everybody usually leaves with a couple of good ideas, so hence the one good idea. Adam Lash is a producer in Wisconsin. We've been to his farm and done a field day. Matt Hintz was our pitcher yesterday. Brian Corkle, I love his background because it always feels like he's running through the field. And usually he's just at his desk. So anyway, there's a whole bunch of folks all over the Midwest, Mid-South, and we'd love for you all to join that conversation. So this is just some of the statistical part of it, of course, because we have to do evaluations. But 69% of folks who responded to our survey about it said that they gained confidence. 75% agreed they were more motivated to keep doing conservation. About 88% agree that they were more willing to experiment with conservation, and 69% plan to expand their practices. 31% learned about a new practice to implement. So a lot of this really boils down, though, to community. Clearly, there's community here with Oak, but also just community can be built with like-minded producers across the Midwest. And this platform helps us to do that. And we also want to make sure that farmers hear from farmers, not just from, quote, specialists. Hang on just a sec, if you don't mind. I'm almost there. And so the sense of community is what we've really heard over and over again. So this is the second project Cody's been part of that has done some of this virtual learning space, but we've talked to other producers who say, I'm the only one in my community doing some of these different practices. I don't look like my neighbors. When we know the coffee shop chatter about what I'm doing, makes me uncomfortable. Or some producers will say they'll experiment on the back 40 because they don't want that, chatter going on. I like Cody and Angela's perspective. They do the wonky stuff right in the front so that people will ask questions. So they have that platform for education. But anyway, I just want to invite you, and hopefully you'll agree that you can build community virtually, especially when you might feel like you're the only person doing these different practices, and especially with that conservation first perspective. So anyway, I will end with that. Cody's going to show us some of the tools that he's got, but I saw a hand up right there.
So this network that you're creating, it's a great idea, and we do very similar things at Organic Valley. Would you say out of your farmers that are participating, are they organic? Are they conventional? Is it a little bit of everything? Are they livestock growers? Are they crop growers? Like, what does that community actually look like?
So what has happened is mostly, I don't know that I could say mostly, because I looked at the registration yesterday, and so we've got acreage of multiple thousands of acres, row crop, that's rented and owned land, and we've got 7 acres. So really wide swath. And I had, we have sheep and goat producers, we've got beef operations, we've got folks who are corn and bean rotations, cover cropping, there's a wide variety of things. And I don't know how that lands, with you. I don't want to make a call on that. And sometimes you're like, well, these people aren't like me. They've got this huge equipment. They've got this, they've got that. I think the conversations kind of go beyond what equipment you've got. I mean, some of it is consider what equipment you have, what is your capital, what can you do? But really it's kind of thinking beyond, what you might otherwise already know. So, and I'll say for an example, we had a guy on as a pitcher. He had rented land. His landlord hadn't really done much to maintain it. He wanted to do some conservation on it, but it was going to be a really heavy investment of time and money to get things back to where he thought they could be in conservation, and he was struggling with how to do it. And I think Cody or Angelo, somebody in Central, he was in Illinois or Michigan maybe, and they said, well, why don't you burn it, as a management strategy, actually try fire, actually try something else. And it was like this light bulb went off. He's like, wow, I hadn't even thought of that. So having those really different management systems can spur some interesting conversation. So there's some folks that are organic, there's some folks that are a blend, and some that are really what I would consider traditional row crop producers, big time operators. We've got a guy in Mississippi who's doing cotton. There's some rice, so the systems look really different. Some of it's just a mindset of how do you use what you've got? How do you use those incremental investments to achieve conservation and make it work, and consider crop insurance and consider inputs, all of that stuff. So it's an interesting balance. And also from a facilitator perspective, like, I never know what these people are going to say. So it's like, I got to be ready to mute people at any time, but, sometimes it's going to be a little strange, or you don't even know what they're talking about. But certainly we have evidence that these farmer networks can help work toward greater adoption of conservation. Okay, Cody has a lot of tools for the show and tell part.
So I just brought some of the stuff that I use. I know that starting out for me, I didn't know what all this stuff was. Just to be able to get my hands on it, look at it, and hear somebody's perspective. So I just grabbed a bunch of stuff and sitting in the barn. I've got some different type of step-in posts. Something that I found recently that I think would have really helped me when I was starting off was this pigtail caddy. So it just goes on here. Can you hear me? All right. This pigtail caddy, and I can give you references for where you can purchase a lot of this stuff, but man, if I'd have had this when I was starting out, it would have been nice. It doesn't work so good on a slick floor, but you wouldn't be grazing this anyway. But you can just kind of walk along, and you've got your reel in your hand. Pretend that's my microphone. And you got your reel in your hand. You got to put a post in where you just take a step backwards, and it kind of catches in the grass and raises up. And if you've got it set properly, you can just reach down there and grab it. Obviously, I'm not demonstrating very well, but I'm not on grass. So you got your step-in post. You step your post in the ground, hook your reel in, and just keep on going down the way. Same thing, coming back, you can reel it up. So I wished I would have found this early on. It would have saved me a lot of, bundling a post under my arms and all that kind of stuff. But so that was something that I found that was pretty neat. And I do prefer this type of post. Angela, do you mind to help me? Hold that, please. I prefer this type of post, which is called a ring top post. The primary reason I like it is because that is all smooth. They don't get tangled up in each other. They're a little bit more expensive than what's called a pigtail top. So this is a pigtail post. Same principle as this, okay? But they get tangled up a lot worse, and the metal that the post is made out of, you can probably tell this one's been bent up and dinged up. The metal that these ring tops are made out of is a whole lot better, and the metal actually stops about right there. So whereas the ring tops or the pigtail tops, the metal goes all the way through that, and it just has a coating on the outside. So this one doesn't, but a lot of them, after some time, that plastic winds up getting cut, and so then if you're working that fence while it's hot, and that you touch that spot where it's got a slit, you'll get a little shock. But it's good to get a little shock every now and then. Reminds you what the fence is doing. The one advantage of this style post over the ring top is that you can put these old rebar post insulators on them. If for some reason you're training animals to a fence, or you've got sheep and goats, you want to be able to run multiple strand wire or whatever. So that's something that I do use from time to time. But it makes them really, really bulky having those insulators on there. Some just Tractor Supply farm store type post. I would not recommend these whatsoever for any reason, but if you want to look at them, that's one thing. That's what they are. If you are gonna utilize these kind, when you go looking through the box, do I have two of these, Angela? The white step-ins. When you look in the box, all right, take this one. You look in the box of them, you'll see there's a difference in these two. Anybody see the difference? See, this one's got that extra little hook on it. They both have, on the backside, they've got these little notches. That little hook can go inside that notch, and then you can make yourself a little corner. Adds a little more stability to it. So make sure if you're going to buy these kind, you pick out some that's got the notches in them. Or it's got that extra little hook on there. I don't know what the purpose of that is. Maybe it's hanging a reel. Maybe it's to do that. I don't know. But anyway, but these are, I've not found these to be super useful. Now, if you're wanting to run, multiple strand fence for sheep or goats or something, I could see why you would want to use these. But if you're just running a single wire for cows, these are way too bulky to be efficient. What's that? That's what that's for, to zip tie a sign on them. Yeah. For your fence running around your farm, I want to have electric on at least two sides of every field. And these are two things. So if you have good fence, you have good, barbed wire, woven wire, whatever, this offset will drive into a wooden post. You put a steeple right there just to keep it from twisting. You want to hang it like this, not like this, because water will get in there and it'll cause that to freeze and bust. So you install it like this, makes a really good offset, so you can run, a single wire, smooth wire, high tensile wire around that perimeter of that field. And you can put these like every 40 to 50 feet. You don't have to have them on every single post. But it gets you an extension cord all the way around your farm that you can then use these reels to tie into. If you're like me and you've got really rough fence, and you don't have good posts that you can drive those into, these work really good because they actually connect to the old woven wire or the barbed wire or whatever it is that you've got there currently, and they will move with that wire, okay? So if the wind's blowing, it's not going to blow that wire into your electric wire. So this works really good. I think both of these run about $3 a piece, something like that. Again, you can put this like every 40, 50 feet, depending on your terrain. But if you got flat ground, it's a pretty straight run. I mean, heck, you can go 40, 50 feet with no problem at all. Because all you're doing is you're trying to keep an electric wire up off the ground that you can, because when you take your reel, you're going to hook your reel on something solid and then just run a jumper wire or something to hook to that electricity. All you got to do is be able to get the current around that field. This is what electric netting looks like. If you're not familiar with that, it's got a learning curve to it. What I have found that I prefer is a single spike. So this is electric netting that has a single spike. This is a 32 inches high, 34 inches high, something like that. 35 inches high. A 935/12 is what this one is. So it has 9 horizontal strands. It's 35 inches tall when the post is installed, and it has 12 inches between the verticals in this fence. The poultry netting has like 3 or 4 inches between the verticals, and it makes it way more bulky. Do not use the poultry netting. This is 164 feet. I would encourage you, if you're going to get into this, to get a minimum of 7 rolls, because that allows you to set up a 4-wire pin. So you've got 1 wire on all 4 sides. You've got 3 wires to set up your next pin with the 1 wire in between as a shared. So you need a minimum of 7 rolls to be able to use this stuff efficiently. And we are grazing 65 acres on our home farm with this stuff. We don't have any permanent fences that the animals have been using. Well, we do have about 500 feet of permanent fence now that we can utilize. But we've been grazing 65 acres at home with this stuff. We've got about 18 rolls of netting. We've run as many as 3 different groups at any given time. So it is something that you can utilize. And we are running this off of a solar box. I built it myself. But if you're going to be using a solar box, something that is portable, this is a little tool that I found that is really, really handy, because you've got to be able to move that ground rod around. So this is a slide hammer ground rod. So you use that hammer. You can use that to drive it into the ground and also to drive it back out of the ground. So this is something that I found that's really, really handy for that. On reels, Angela makes fun of my mineral bag. If you've ever used one of these, you know that when you're walking along and you're unrolling it, when you stop, it keeps on going. Not if you've got a mineral bag stuck in there. I've always just used the regular old non-conductive handles. If I want to hook the wire on hot, I wrap it around the hot wire, hook that back to something solid, and then it's hot. I usually work fences hot. I'm putting them up while they're hot and taking them down while they're hot. That just keeps me in practice. Angela doesn't like it when I do that because then she comes to help and she gets shocked. The geared reels are a necessity. So every time I turn that handle, it spins the bobbin 3 times. You will not realize how much time you're spending sitting there rolling that wire up until you have a non-geared reel, and it takes an eternity. This reel, I'll pass this one around. This reel has the twisted twine, and if you feel it, you can feel it's got snags. It's just not a really high quality twine. I'll pass this around this way. The next reel that I've got here has the braided twine. You can feel of it and kind of look at it. I'll pass it around right behind the other one. This is a more superior twine that is worth the extra cost. When it comes to watering systems, this is something that I've found to be really, really useful. This is called a Plasson, Plasson. Plasson Quick Connect. So this piece right here can install in your main water line. So if you're installing a water line to feed a water trough somewhere on your farm, this can be installed below ground with a piece of pipe sticking up so you can access this from above ground. And then this piece will thread onto, you have to have an adapter, but you thread it onto a garden hose. You come along, click that in there, and now you've got water to fill up a trough where you don't have a permanent watering system. You can also use this if you want to put pipe above ground. You can put T's in, put one of these in, and you can have a spot where you can access and be able to use water. So the primary place I use these is whenever I have water lines running adjacent to a crop field. I'll put these quick connects in on the fence line of that crop field so that then I can install a water tank that I set inside of the crop field. I don't want a permanent tank in there, but I can use these quick connects to be able to have a temporary tank in those locations. Does anybody want me to pass this around? I'll just leave it up here. And I think that's all I have. You're more than welcome to come up and have a look. I'll stick around for a few extra minutes.
I take like 2 minutes to sell my soil and water conservation story, and then Cody really sells it because he makes it doable, he makes it feel achievable, and he's really, he's out there finding these little tweaks that make conservation more realistic on the farm. And so that's really what I'm looking at from a conservation professional perspective, is somebody who can speak to the other farmers there and say, here's how I do it, here's how you can do it. And you're not just improving soil and water conservation, but you're improving your production practice. And at the end of the day, the economics look better. And so that's why I really appreciate Cody and Angela.
One more comment. Keep an eye out for a field day at the Loretta Mother House sometime early July with the Organic Association. I'm sure we'll talk grazing, but we're also going to talk pumpkins and sap analysis and nutrient management, a lot of that kind of stuff as well.
If we could take a second to thank Cody, Angela, and Amanda. And then if you guys don't mind, when you guys finish passing the reel around, please bring it back up to the front. And then I passed out orange slips. If you guys would please take a second to fill that out and bring it back to me. It's really important that we get those back to the Oak staff here so we can keep improving on the field days and on the conference every year. So thank you all for coming.